A BET exclusive. Vice President Kamala Harris one-on-one. As America emerges from the pandemic, the Vice President sits down with BET to discuss the administration's plans to address the issues that matter to Black America, including increasing vaccination rates, ensuring economic recovery, protecting voting rights, combating gun violence, and passing police reform. The administration has proposed using federal funds to fund police departments. How do you reform the police at the same time give money to police departments?
You are watching a BET News Special, State of Our Union. Vice President Kamala Harris. Here now, Soledad O'Brien.
So, Vice President Harris, thank you so much for talking with us here in the Vice President's ceremonial office.
Thank you very much. Welcome, welcome.
I thought we would jump right into our conversation and start with vaccines.
Yes.
Less than a quarter of African Americans are fully vaccinated. And I'm curious if you think that's because of a lack of access. Is that because there's resistance to getting a vaccine? And what do you think is causing it? And then what do you do about it?
So I start with this. The vaccines are safe, they are free, and they will save people's lives. 1 in 3 Black Americans know somebody who has died from COVID. Think about that. So the impact on the community, the impact on individuals, on their families is profound in terms of the loss. Access is an issue. To be sure, I am of the opinion that, yes, we know the history, we know the Tuskegee experience, we know all that, but we also know that Dr. Kizzy Corbett, a Black woman, was a creator of the vaccines that are saving lives, and that the vaccine is the product of over 10 years of research. Didn't just come up overnight. We know that, a lot of people say, well, let me just wait and see how this all looks. I'm gonna give it 6 months. Well, it's July. It's time for you to get your vaccine. Time's up. But we want to make it accessible. So here's that point. People have full lives. They got lots of demands on their lives. They've got kids, they've got 1 or 2 jobs, sometimes 3, may not live near public transportation, may not have a car. So to address that, we have created programs with pharmacies to make sure that they're accessible at many hours around the clock so that people who need a flexible schedule can do that. We have a program with the rideshare companies that will pick people up at their home, take them to the vaccination site, and bring them back. We are challenging the private sector companies to give people paid time off to go get their vaccines, because sadly, so many people don't have paid time off for health issues. So these are the kinds of things that we are doing to make it easier. Childcare. So a lot, like the YMCA, free childcare for people to go get vaccines. And a lot of them are also providing free childcare or free services if people need to recover from the vaccine for that short period of time where they may have side effects. So accessibility is really important, but I really do believe the biggest issue is information. Getting the information to the people about the safety of it, the fact that it's free, the fact that it is accessible, and we put in place assistance to get and make it easier for people to get the vaccine. And it's also the misinformation about the vaccine and the nature of it themselves. And we have to
sticking to your body.
Yeah, I mean, it's awful. And here's the thing. I'm going to repeat myself. 1 in 3 Black people in America know somebody who has died from this disease. And here's the other point that I will make. Virtually everyone who is in a hospital right now because of COVID-19 is unvaccinated. Virtually everyone who has died from COVID-19 was unvaccinated. So the thing that I just want to remind folks of is that you have the power. Don't let anybody take your power from you. You have the power to save your life. You have the power to make a decision about what happens to your body. Don't let people dupe you into thinking that this thing is not going to help you. It will help you, and it will save your life.
The goal was 70%, which is going to be narrowly missed. How problematic with the Delta variant now?
Well, the Delta variant, that's real, Soledad. I mean, that's real. It is by many accounts more lethal, and it spreads faster than the variant we've been dealing with for all these months. And again, I mean, the point has to be, understand, COVID-19 will kill you potentially. And there is a vaccine that will save you. Right? So let's just weigh and balance that out.
When we come back, what's the administration's plan to aid Black America's economic recovery? Unemployment rate for Black people's 9%. What is the administration's strategy to help Black people specifically recover?
You are watching State of Our Union, Vice President Kamala Harris, one-on-one. Here again, Soledad O'Brien.
Let's turn to the economy and specifically how it relates to Black people. Unemployment rate for Black people's 9%. For overall in America, it's just over 5%. I remember early on in coronavirus, people were calling COVID the great equalizer. And I remember thinking like, it actually is just highlighting horrible
Absolutely
inequalities in this kind of healthcare, jobs.
All of that.
What is the administration's strategy to help Black people specifically recover?
Yeah. So I have thought of this pandemic as being an accelerator. So for those for whom things were bad before, they became even worse during the pandemic. It really highlighted the fractures and the fissures and the failures, and in particular around racial disparities in the healthcare system, in the economy, in the education system, housing, right? Remember, even before the pandemic, we were all aware Black families have 1/10 the wealth of other families. And so when you then look at what COVID did for people who are frontline workers, many of whom were Black people, you look at it in terms of what it did, the economic impact of not having paid sick leave, paid family leave, and what that meant to families. And so what we have done is a number of things. One, we got a bill passed, which we fought very hard to get passed. They got folks $1,400 checks to help them get through the height of the crisis. We have extended unemployment benefits, so $300 extra for each check to help people get through. We have also said, look, we need to deal with what folks need in terms of families who are raising children. So we grew the child tax credit, which means that families get an extra check now every month instead of at the end of the year to help them raise their kids. These are really important issues that had to be addressed even before the pandemic, which we have addressed. On the child tax credit, everything tells us that it will lift half of America's Black children out of poverty. Let's talk about Black businesses. I've seen numbers that up to 40, 50% gone out of business, right? And we know that our businesses are part of the heartbeat of the community. It is not only part of the social and cultural fabric of the community, it is those business owners that are civic leaders, that hire locally, that mentor. And so what we have done is, for example, I'm working on the community banks, getting them $12 billion with a focus on minority and women-owned businesses to make sure that we are providing Black entrepreneurs with access to capital. That is a huge issue. It was an issue before the pandemic. It remains an issue that was highlighted by the pandemic. We need to support our Black businesses. We need to provide them access to capital. I've been traveling around the country, meeting with, for example, in Oakland, the place of my birth, a woman who is running a catering business, right? Started out her kitchen and out of the community, and then during the height of the pandemic, she's feeding folks who couldn't afford meals. And when she started her business out of her kitchen, she was told by the bank she was unbankable, a word she had never heard before.
Many Black business owners, small Black business owners, were told that.
Exactly. Unbankable? What does that mean? Because you don't see my vision, because you don't see the value of my work in my community. And so the work that we are doing to support the community banks, CDFIs, is about making sure that we have a financial banking system within the community of the community who gets the community to provide resources for our entrepreneurs.
When we come back, the administration has proposed using federal funds to fund police departments. How do you both reform the police, at the same time give money to police departments?
You are watching State of Our Union. Vice President Kamala Harris, one-on-one. Here again, Soledad O'Brien.
I want to turn to talk about crime and policing. Crime is down in every category. I was surprised to read, except for the big one, which is homicide, gun violence up. The administration has proposed using federal funds, the money from the American Rescue Plan, to really fund police departments. At the same time, there have been many calls, as you well know, about defunding police or taking money from police department budgets and using them, for example, to help with mental health issues, sort of fund something else. How do you juggle those two things? How do you both reform the police, make policing different, at the same time give money to police departments?
Yeah. Well, first, I'd say that we should not be offered, and certainly not accept, a false choice. Like when we're talking about gun violence, we need to deal with that. So as an administration, we're saying, for example, the firearms dealers, that those who are violating the law, there needs to be a consequence for that. On the issue of policing, we need accountability. And we are, and I was actually one of the original authors of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And I feel very strongly that needs to be passed. There needs to be accountability for police officers who break the rules or break the laws. We need to have a ban on chokeholds. We need to deal with accountability in terms of legal accountability. So all of those things need to happen. We also need to, on the broader issue, understand this. And this is what I put in the context of saying we should reimagine how we think about public safety. There are certain communities for which we see a big police presence. In other communities, we don't see a big police presence. But you know what you see in those communities? Well-funded schools, high rates of home ownership, small businesses that have access to capital, people who have access to health care, including mental health care, and it's affordable and available. And in those communities, you don't see a large police presence. Let's understand what makes for a healthy community. And it includes the resources that everybody needs every day. And in that way, when I think about what we need to do to be smart in achieving public safety, let's provide access to capital for small businesses and communities. Let's make sure that our schools are well funded and our teachers are well paid in public schools, instead of what's happening now, which is over 90% of public school teachers have to come out of their own pocket to help pay for school supplies. Let's deal with access to health care, including mental health care. Let's include creating incentives for home ownership, financial incentives, which is part of a policy that I've been advocating for years.
While also paying for more police officers.
Well, I think that, listen, there's no question that we need to agree that if a woman is raped, if a child is molested, if one human being kills another human being, there needs to be consequence. We want that there will be a police officer there to take that report. I don't think we can accept a false choice. We have to understand that while we want that, we have under-resourced our public education system, our healthcare system, our system that should be about supporting, entrepreneurs in every community with a particular emphasis on low-income communities, on Black and brown communities. That's the work that needs to happen, and we've not done that. And if you want to really deal with the issue of how you support healthy communities that can thrive, you got to make sure that the communities have the basic resources that anybody needs to be successful. And we've not done a good job of that.
When we come back, the administration's plans to protect voting rights. People are talking about potential compromises. Is agreeing to voter ID one of those compromises that you'd support?
You are watching State of Our Union. Vice President Kamala Harris, one-on-one. Here again, Soledad O'Brien.
Another key priority is voting rights. Obviously, the recent Supreme Court decisions around disclosure, around weakening the Voting Rights Act. 48 states now have restrictions to voting, pushed by Republicans. I read that you specifically asked to take this on. Is that true?
I did.
Why?
It's so fundamental. It's so fundamental. In our country right now, I believe there are 380 laws that are being presented to suppress or make it difficult for people to vote. And, you know, we've been saying this for years. I mean, people lived and died for our right to vote. It is through the voting process, through the ballot box, that we get all the things that we need. And there are intentional attempts to deprive, in particular, Black and brown and students and Native Americans and Asians, the access to voting. Voting is a right. There's no question about that. We are not fighting we have the right. What they're trying to do is make the right meaningless by depriving access. Think about what they're doing in these states. They're basically punishing people for standing in line to vote. They're punishing people for standing in line to vote. They're saying, well, if you're going to be standing in that line for all those hours, you can't have any water or any food.
So what can you do about that? I mean, again, the Supreme Court not working against what you're trying to do, which makes it more difficult in the fight. So what will you do?
Well, first of all, it's about using the bully pulpit to help people see what's happening in the midst of all the daily issues that they have. You know, we're not in an election year. You know, we tend to rally when we know the election is about to happen. But right now, we need to start rallying because these laws are being passed right now that will make it almost impossible, at least very difficult for you to vote. And why are they trying to make it difficult for you to vote? So that you don't vote. When we vote, we see what happens in terms of, you know what people voted for in 2020? They voted for an extension of the child tax credit, which is now going to lift half of America's children out of poverty. So part of the work that I'm doing is to travel around our country and ask people in the midst of all of your challenges, please pay attention to this. Most of what you're seeing in terms of attempts to suppress the vote are coming out of legislatures in southern states. And, you know, and I'm also saying, look, for some of those states where where the legislature is hell-bent on making it difficult for us to vote, we're going to have to start rallying now to make sure we're thinking creatively about how we register people to vote, how we remind them of what's on the line.
People are talking about potential compromises. Is agreeing to voter ID one of those compromises that you'd support?
I don't think that we should underestimate what that could mean. Because in some people's mind, that means, well, you're going to have to Xerox or photocopy your ID to send it in to prove you are who you are. Well, there are a whole lot of people, especially people who live in rural communities, who don't, there's no Kinko's, there's no Office Max near them. People have to understand that when we're talking about voter ID laws, be clear about who you have in mind and what would be required of them to prove who they are. Of course, people have to prove who they are, but not in a way that makes it almost impossible for them to prove who they are.
Here's the short list of what you're overseeing, and I've left things out.
Okay.
Immigration, increasing broadband access, Black maternal mortality, racial inequality, women in the workforce, infrastructure. We just talked about voting rights. That seems like a lot for one person.
Oh, don't forget I'm in charge of the Space Council.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, this is the short, partial list. Can one person do all that realistically?
Well, you know, I've always multitasked, and certainly there's a lot to get done. Yeah, maybe I don't say no enough, but I do believe that these things are achievable. It's a lot of hard work, but that's why we're here, and that's what people wanted, right? That we will go into these positions, that we will arrive in these positions, that we will work hard and get things done. And that's what motivates me, truly.
Vice President Kamala Harris, what a pleasure. Nice to talk to you.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.